Hey guys, Matt here, Wreck Brewery. This is going to be some information on the Brewtubers Malt Experiment 2020. So the long-awaited malt experiment is finally coming to fruition here. Well, first let's start off with a little drink. I got one of my favorite beers I like to go back to. It's the Schafferhofer Hefeweizen. It's a grapefruit beer. Very, very refreshing, really light. It's like 3%, I think. So we can't talk about beer without having a beer, right? So it just seemed appropriate. So yeah, and we're sporting the Brewtubers glass for this one. It is, after all, Brewtubers Experiment coming up. So let's get down to business. Okay, 2020 Brewtubers Malt Experiment. So I wanted to get you guys out some information on this because it is going to be coming up pretty soon. We're looking for the registration for this to open up on June 1st. So we wanted to give an opportunity for everyone to absorb the information and give any thoughts they may have before registration opens. What we're looking for in this is to really showcase the base malts. And we're looking for everyone to choose a unique base malt. So a base malt to us is anything that has a usage rate of up to 100%. So that means we're not looking for caramel malts or roasted malts or things like that. That wouldn't work for this. Honestly, if you did say, if you use something like a Crystal 60, 100% in the beer, it's probably not going to taste that good. That's my opinion, and I think maybe others would agree. But we're just looking for something that would be categorized as base malt. Now, there's a ton of them out there, and we are allowing an exception to the rule. So we're looking for people to choose different kinds of base malts, like a Vienna, Munich, Pale Ale, two-row, Maris Otter, those sort of things. But if up to 3 people decide they wanted to use two-row, that's okay as long as people pick different maltsters. Because as far as we're concerned, they're still different malts. They're coming from a different origin, and they're going to be different in some way. So if you wanted to use two-row like someone else has already registered for, just make sure you choose a different maltster. But we're allowing up to 3 of that to happen. And when we say different maltster, we're thinking something like Brias versus Great Western versus Wireman. So the hops that we're going to use for this one is Sabro hops. We thought that made sense because there's been a lot of talk about that lately in the community. So a lot of people probably already have them on hand. So let's go ahead and use them. Plus, it could make a quite interesting beer. Sabro hops, they will add a nice complexity to the beer, so it would make it something that's interesting. They're supposed to impart some tangerine, tropical, coconut, and some stone fruit type of aromas to it, as well as hints of mint, cedar, or like a creaminess to it as well. So it could be interesting. This is a smash beer, so it's going to be the single malt, single hop. So Sabro hops will be used at 60 minutes, 15, and flame out. And the yeast that we decided to use is USO5, which is a nice clean yeast. It's cheap, it's easy to store, and people probably have that on hand as well. So we're just trying to make this as easy as possible. Now, between all these ingredients, we're looking for certain numbers. We are looking for an OG of 1052, and we're looking for an IBU of 37. Now, I will show you later in this video an example of how those numbers look like in Beersmith, and you would just make the adjustments accordingly for your system and for the malts that you're using. The water chemistry, we're trying to keep that simple as well. Some people really enjoy it, other people don't want to have anything to do with it. So we're trying to merge both practices here to make it easy for everybody and fun and interesting. So we're looking for something that's a little bit more than a typical Pilsen type of a water profile. So what you'll see later in this video is a demonstration in brewing water of how we got to the numbers we got. So we're trying to make this on the light side, but a little bit more malt forward to kind of really bring out those malt characters that are going to be in the malts that are chosen. But for those that aren't savvy with that, that's okay. We're trying to make it easy and say that if you're going to use 10 gallons of water, then you can just easily put in 2 grams of Epsom salt and 2 grams of calcium chloride to get close to the numbers that we're trying to shoot for. The water that we're using is similar to the yeast experiment. It was using their own water to impart any differences. We're all trying to start off from the same slate. So distilled water or RO water is going to be the base. And then those salts will bring us up to where you need to be, depending on the volume that you're using. The recipe can be found on the Brewtubers website. We have an XML format out there as well as a PDF. So if you use Beersmith, you can plug that in and just change it based on your system. Or the PDF, you can just print it out, read it, and copy it into whatever program that you do use. If you don't use Brew and Water, and use some other program, we'll go through the details of what those numbers look like for the rotor profile. That way you can plug it into whatever software that you are using. As far as the other details, we want to get a mash pH of 5.3 or thereabouts. Again, I think I might have, if I didn't say, we're looking at a mash of 152. We're looking to ferment at room temperature, 70 degrees. And we're looking to cold crash this. 3-day cold crash, probably good at the end of fermentation and before you're about to package it. So if you want to let it ferment for a week or two, that's fine. Just make sure that before you package it, you cold crash it for 3 days prior. We're not going to add anything else to the beer. We want to see what each malt brings as far as clarity too. So we're not looking to do any gelatin. We're not doing any special pitching. So it's just going to be, rip the package open of the SO5 and dump it in there. We're not rehydrating it. We're not doing a yeast starter. It's not really needed for a 1052 beer. As far as fermentation goes, no special fermentation either. Just do traditional fermentation. We're not looking to do any pressure fermentation either. We're trying to have everything as level set as possible, and we think this will get us there. As far as the other important dates go, so registration again, June 1st. It will close at the end of the month, and then we're looking at early July for probably a good suggested brewing time frame to start brewing, because we're looking to receive all the beers to myself. I'll be the hub for this by August the 7th. So the first week of August, I should get the beers in, and I'll quickly redistribute and send it back out to everybody. And then we're looking for the rest of the month to look for voting. We're hoping that voting can close by Labor Day, and we'll put everything out on the website, just similar to what Gary did for the yeast experiment. So looking forward to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. Stay tuned. I'm going to show you some updates on how we got to the numbers that we got to in Beersmith for the recipe, as well as the water profile in Brew and Water. And I hope that helps everybody. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them here. You can send me an email. You can shoot me anything through the different social media channels. We already have a channel in the Discord called Malt Experiment. We can have a good discussion there. Look forward to everybody that might join up on this. So we got a couple weeks to think about it before registration starts. So I hope to see you there, and take care. Cheers. Okay, so this is just an example of how you would plug it into Beersmith. This is just based on the recipe that we have posted out on the Brewtubers website for the malt experiment. So this is tailored for my system. I'm planning on brewing 5.5 gallons, just so that I end up with a total of 5 gallons at the end of all of this. So I'm going to be using roughly about 10 gallons of water, and I'm going to use distilled water. You could use distilled water or RO water depending on what you have access to. And just to keep it simple for anyone that isn't too keen on messing with salts, we're recommending for 10 gallons of water to treat it with 2 grams of calcium chloride and 2 grams of Epsom salt. However best you want to do that to achieve those numbers that we're looking for. And I'll show you that in another clip for Brew and Water, how I got to the mineral content that we're after. So this is just again an example of if we were to use Golden Promise for this recipe, this is where it would end up. We're using Savor hops for this beer. It is a smash beer, so it's going to be a single malt and a single hop. We're adding the hops in at the 60 minutes for bittering, 15 minutes, and flame out. And these are the quantities that I've come up with to reach a bitterness IBU total of 37. So you can use these as reference points to get something close based on what you're doing here. So for Golden Promise, it's going to be, to get to a 1052 beer, it's going to be just over 10 pounds of grain for this size batch for what I'm doing for 5 gallons. So that, again, that'll change based on how much you're brewing, what your system is to reach that number. So of course you'll go in here and slide these numbers around to make it work for you. Now if we were to say we were going to use a different grain, so if we're not using Golden Promise and say we're going to use Vienna now, so we're going to go ahead and plug in Vienna. I'm just going to pick Brias Vienna. As you can see, it's going to change the gravity and our bitterness, so we need to make some adjustments. So I use Beersmith. You can use anything to get these same numbers, but I'm just going to change this to 1052, and I need to use a little bit more malt now for Vienna for that to work. Now the IBUs have also changed, so we're going to need to make those adjustments in here as well to reach the bitterness that we want. So we're trying to aim for 37, and there you go. It's just going to dial everything down to what exactly we need to reach those numbers. So key things out of this is we want to hit 1052 original gravity. We want 37 IBUs. but we want them chunked in as close to these numbers as possible, which are listed on the Brewtubers website, to get a similar wort. That's the goal, so everybody's basically brewing the same wort. The only difference would be the malt that you're using, so we can really see what each malt does for this beer. Very similar to the yeast experiment where we really wanted to showcase each yeast. So we're trying to remove as many variables as possible from this, and this particular recipe should do that if everybody sticks to it. And again, we're using US-05. We are going to be mashing at 152, which is listed here in my Beersmith. Again, pay no attention to some of the numbers that are here. These are numbers for my system. It will be different for everybody's system, so you'll want to dial in accordingly. We're also going to be fermenting at 70 degrees, so everybody can do a similar wort in the end. This is what it looks like. This is an example of what I have in Beersmith 3. Okay, so this is Brew and Water, and this is just an example of how I arrived at the numbers that I have gotten for our water profile. So we're all starting off with distilled water or RO water. So in my water tab, I just put everything to 0. Now I'm not going to go through a full overview of how to use Brew and Water. This is just to explain how we got where we got with those numbers. So under the grain bill tab, I put in, for the example that was shown in Beersmith, the Golden Promise. Say I was going to use that as my base malt, and I would need to use some acidulated malt to get down to that pH that we're aiming for. We are aiming for a mash pH of about 5.3. So in my experience with my system and the malts that I have here on hand, I use Wireman acidulated malt, and I found that to be a little bit stronger than what they have as the default here in Brew and Water. Default is 1 acid strength, by the way, and I have found that Wireman for me is about 1.2. So if I were to use Gold Promise in this quantity for my 5-gallon batch that I'm brewing, I would need to use 3.75 ounces of acidulated malt in my mash to get to the 5.3. Now, if I were to use a different malt, say I wanted to use Munich, for example, I know that Munich, I believe the Lovibond of that is like 6.6 or 7. It's definitely higher than Golden Promise is. By doing that, it's going to drastically change my pH. It's going to make it a lot lower. So I'm going to have to back off my acidulated malt to get to where I need. So I'm just going to say, let's just about half this, so 2. So that gets me closer to the 5.3, doing it that way. And again, these are all estimates. We're all trying to get roughly the same numbers. So you do what you need to do to get there. You may use acidulated malt. You may want to use lactic acid. You may want to use phosphoric acid or citric acid, or whatever the case may be, if you need to make those adjustments. And again, it's going to change based on the malt that you're using. And if anybody needs any help with this, I'm happy to help. I know Gary's happy to help. And anybody else that joined the experiment, there's a lot of good knowledge in our crew. So I'm sure that we'll be chatting on social media and on Discord when this thing starts. So getting to the water adjustments. So what I did here was we started off with a Pilsen profile. We wanted to have a lowish mineral content, but we wanted to be a little bit more malt forward with regards to the water profile. So what we did was we built this up to get these numbers: calcium of 19, magnesium of 5, sulfate of 20, chloride of 33. So if you're good with water chemistry, you can make your adjustments in your salts to get those numbers just fine, just the same as we're doing here. But to make it easy for people, if you're using 10 gallons worth of water, which is what I'm using roughly between the mash and the sparge, I need to use 2 grams of calcium chloride and Epsom salt to get to those numbers. So this is, again, just an example of how I got to those numbers from my system within Brew and Water. And happy to answer any questions if you guys have them.